Muchísimas gracias. Acabamos de escuchar esa importante.
So we're going to listen to how important it is to relate between the different regions. So like Xavier said, we're not just thinking about specifically about Navarre, but it applies to us perfectly. So he's talked about the case of Navarre, the Basque Country, as examples of these regions which are standing out to a certain extent in this relation. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Yeah, Iñaki Arto, who is going to talk about, who's from the Basque Centre for Climate Change. So good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you to ESPON for bringing me here. So I'm delighted to talk to you at the end of this project. Thank you very much to Xavier and Carlos for inviting me. And before starting my presentation, I'd like to say that the work that you've done is amazing. It's just brilliant. And so I'm coming it's come to fill a gap in knowledge, which is going to be really useful for decision making and for creating knowledge. And so this goes along hand in hand with what we're doing, but it goes one step further. What I'm going to present today is a job that we've been doing for the last couple of years for the Basque Statistic Institute, in which we have been looking at how the Basque economy, in terms of supply of goods, and the role that it plays internationally in the Basque economy. So this is a little bit how we're going. I'm going to give you some context for this work. So I'm going to present the methodology and the data and the results and the conclusions. And link it with the work that you've been doing that we're talking about here. What's the context of this work? Well, we all know that in the last few decades, the last 50 years, the world economy has changed a great deal. There's been a great increase in vertical economy, and there's been lots of changes. So there's been an increase in value change. Has become much more important. So there's more interest in knowing the indicators for these phenomena, to analysing the effects of these trends, particularly value change. So usually, historically, there's in international trade statistics gave good information. They talked about to what extent the increases in exports indicated greater profits, greater economic development for the exporting countries or regions. But over the last few decades, it's not such a great indicator anymore, because we've got a lot of increase in intermediate goods. So a high level of exportation doesn't necessarily mean that the international trade has a high impact on international trade. So in the Basque Country, the ratio is 65%, of GDP, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the exports are actually 65% of GDP. They're the value of what these products were beforehand, but then we lose that value through intermediate exports. So we lose it in petrol prices, for example. So the exported by the Basque Country to the United States is the value of crude oil. So part of that value is the value of the crude oil of the Basque Country, imports from Saudi Arabia. What does this mean? So in 1 year, we see that the value of the exports of petrol from the Basque Country, it doesn't mean that if those export values has increased, it doesn't mean that the actual value of the money that stays in the Basque Country has also doubled. So an increase in trade in international goods, we need to be really careful with how we interpret the data. What goes in does not necessarily what comes out. So about 70 years ago, most of the international trade was final goods. So we didn't need intermediates. So we've got now we've got added value, yeah, that's the intermediate and final goods. So we've got two examples here of how it used to be that we exported tires to Italy. So yeah, so before we were looking at vehicles and tires and vehicle parts. So that's why the international trade statistics now need to be interpreted differently in terms of value chains. So they need to reflect the real impact of international trade in different regions, and the role that is played by these chains of value. Yeah, not only in regions but also in sectors. So in the last few decades, and with the proliferation of international intermediates. So we've got the fundamental concept of trade, value-added trade, value-added exports. So this is what's being used internationally. And so we're going to look at how this affects the different chains of value. So how are wealth and employment supported by international trade in the Basque country? So in Vitoria, we've got a Mercedes factory. So we export this final product. So part of the added value from these trucks is for the Basque country, but part of it is in the Czech Republic, Italy, Navarra, all over the place. So the question is, what's the value that stays? What's generated in the Basque country? What is the value of those exports? What percentage can we take, and how are these exports in from the Basque country supported by imports from other regions? These questions we're going to see. Well, we're going to try and answer them. What are the methodologies that we use? Here's a puzzle. Here's a jigsaw puzzle, which is like the global value. In each step in the value chain, an industry in a country adds value, and they pass it on in terms of the product, and they pass it on until we get to the end user. The idea is that within this jigsaw puzzle, what value can be allocated to each region, each country, each business. So what we do, so we break it down. A group of researchers here from the University of Groningen and several other centres. We've worked on a method to break down these exports, these bilateral exports, that to make it from the international statistics. So we're able to look at the Basque country is exporting to the United States, but we need to look at the value of these exports. What part is from the Basque country? What part is for the auxiliary services from other regions? What part is the crude oil that is imported from Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. So this method that we've developed is to break down the value of these exports into little pieces. So there's three big sections: the part that's domestic, the part that's imported, so there's the petrol, and there's another point that's normally much smaller with double counting. It's the value that crosses the border twice. So Basque country exports to Navarra, and Navarra produces part of the supplies and then sends it off to Germany. So it crosses two borders. So there's going to be part of the value that goes back to the Basque country and part of it to Navarra. When we export this final vehicle, part of it needs to be allocated to Navarra. So this is what our method does. So this is how we explain our methodology. We also have some software, a tool that allows users to break these figures down. And in this breakdown, we do it by country and by sector. So the exports we can do in lots of different pieces. And we distinguish between the domestic added value in exports and the added value from Basque engineering industry, which is allocated to the metalware industry, other industries. The final demand for France to export vehicles to Germany. So we can look at all the different aspects of the value chain. So we can look at the added value of the plastic market in Germany. So then it ties back to France and the Basque Country and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into fine detail here, but for specific questions which might interest you, to look at somewhere like Ukraine, which uses a specific product, like electronic products, for example. So this is more or less what we do. We create a series of indicators, 8 indicators here. And from there, so this is a little bit the information that we have, the input-output table from 2015. It's multi-regional, 65 countries and regions, and 36 industries. So this is a starting point. And what we want to do is put the data from the Basque Country into this table. And so we use the input tables for the Basque Country and international trade, export, and import figures. So we put that into the output table. So we look at the origin and destination countries. And what we did was take the rows and the columns that represent the industry in Spain, and we looked at and we divided it into the Basque Country and the rest of the country, and then we could apply our method and calculate the figures for us for our value chain. So a few results. So this is the breakdown of the value of exports for 2015 in the Basque Country. 42,000 euros. So it's 65% of the GDP in the Basque Country. But really, what is the real value that's staying in the Basque Country, as we explained earlier? So we can break it down into 3 components. So more or less half of it, 21,000, is added value in the Basque Country, and 20,000, the rest of it is imports. So the oil from Saudi Arabia, for example. So basically, for each euro that we export, 51 cents is added value for the Basque Country, 48 is for the regions, and what's left is non-content, double counting. This matches the results that Xavier was talking about. This 21,000 euros is the 31% of the GDP. So this is the rest of what you were talking about. 32% is the added value that is coming back to us. These indicators we can so we can look at these exports in terms of added value, and also in terms of the factor content, in terms of jobs. How many jobs are being generated in terms of this money? So 30. So we can look here. It's 34% employment in the Basque Country. So to withstand these exports, we're also generating jobs abroad. So our imports are more intensive in jobs than what we're contributing to the value chain. So there's 1.6 jobs generated abroad for every 1 job in the Basque Country. So if we can talk about this also in terms of countries. So before there was the IDEAM database it didn't exist before, and we couldn't look at things in terms of countries. But we're hoping to be able to break it down by regions, thanks to this IDEAM project. So in the case of Spain, we've got 44% of Basque Country exports are to the rest of Spain, but we don't really know where that goes. It goes to the rest of Spain, but we don't really know what's happening to that. We can also see the ratio. So we can see the part that's domestic, where it says rest of Spain, and the rest of it is imported from other regions in Spain. And so more or less, depending on the type of country and the type of product, these ratios are different. And so in the case of services that the Basque Country exports to Ireland, we can... So we can see here in the USA and Ireland, we can see the difference in the figures, yeah? That the difference between import and export, yeah? That it's much greater in Ireland than it is in the USA. And so talking about integration with other countries, most of our exports go to the rest of Spain, and 32% to the European Union. So we can also give some results in terms of sectors. So here we've added them because we've put them together into groups. So we've got 4 groups of industry that generate 86% of the exports, particularly we've got metal, machinery, transport services, and the energy sector. So, and that's the majority of our exports. We can also see the added value of the different components that we have in the exports. Remember, in the exports we've got 51% is domestic and the rest is imported. So we can see which regions that they go to. So in the case of the Basque Country, so 51% is domestic, 12 is from the EU, 19 is non-EU, and 80% is the rest of the country. And so when we see where our added value goes, we say 32% goes to the EU, 24 is non-European, and 44% is the rest of Spain. We can see the same with employment data. So I won't dwell on that. And what we can also see is break down this domestic part. In which sectors of, where are we generating this in the Basque Country? We're exporting oil products, and we're making added value, but where is that coming from? Yeah, is it coming from countries? Is it coming from the refinery industry? Trade services? The fact that you're exporting a commodity doesn't mean that all the value is being generated in that actual product. There's lots of other companies in that chain of value, in that provision chain, supply chain. This is the destination of the added value in the Basque Country and the employment, which are more or less the same by destination of exports. And we can see that 44% goes to the rest of Spain, France 10%, 7% to Germany, 4% to the USA. And generally, in Basque Country's relations with the rest of Spain, so they're exporting 15% of their added value and 15% of jobs. And 10%, we're talking about the GDP and the Basque Country. So 10% is transactions with the EU and 5% is non-EU. So here we see what I was talking about earlier. So where is the added value generated and where does it go? So 21% of the added value generated by Basque exports is basic metal and non-metallic other products, the metal industry. So 27 of the added value of the exports is being generated from exports from the metal industry. So from this 27% comes from this section. See this blue line? But there's also a part that comes from this other sector, or another one that comes from trade and transportation services. So we can see, so basic metals generates 27%, but 27% comes from basic metals, and the rest of it comes from these other two sections. It's all interlinked. This is more or less the same for employment. So now I'm going to finish with a series of conclusions. What's the role of international trade in the Basque country, in the Basque economy? Bueno, the first conclusion is methodological. The MRIO databases are extremely useful. To analyze the role of international trade in regional economies and the role of regions in the Basque country, and we can see the impacts of these of them in domestic economies. We're also talking about the vulnerabilities, as Xavier mentioned. So we'll look at the inputs that the intermediates are involved with that withstand our exports. How are we vulnerable? How are we more exposed to conflict, to extreme phenomena, climate change? In the case of the Basque country, the exports related to the GDP are very high, but this doesn't mean that it's a direct contribution to GDP. Remember, we've seen that it's only 31%, not 65 or 62 here, and the same for employment. 31% of this 31%, 15 goes to the rest of the country, and the rest goes to Germany, for example, and France above all. 5% is non-EU. What's the composition of the exports? More than half is domestic added value, so and the rest is foreign. So as we've said, for each euro that we export, it generates 51% in the Basque country, and the rest in other regions. These indicators are higher than normal when we're looking at a national scale. So if we talk about China, for example, or the United States, instead their level of vertical integration is much smaller. Yeah, we're a region that is very small compared to our framework. Yeah, so we can't compare ourselves against massive countries, for example. So this is a problem of scale when we're interpreting the results. So when we put it in a different context, then the results are going to change. Yeah? So I'm going to go to the last slide, which is probably the most interesting for us to talk about. So if we're looking at the ESPON IDE project and value chains, as we said at the beginning of this presentation, I think that the information that is being generated in this project fills a gap in knowledge to be able to analyze this type of to be able to help value chain analysis on a regional level and help move our knowledge in this direction. And so in this respect, things that what can we do? We can analyze the interrelations between the Basque country and other European regions, and also in other European regions and also the rest of the world. And so the IDE database looks at European regions, but beyond that, we do have flows of trade. So this is one of the things. So another thing is to look at niche areas to capture more added value. So we need to identify the value chain and and see where we can generate more value. How can we work as a region to capture more added value? And another interesting aspect, to look at synergies between different regions and how the regions around us need the products that we're making. And finally, identify the vulnerabilities to disruptive events. Yeah, how vulnerable are we to these events, to climate change, etc. So I think I've stayed within my time. So that's all from me. I'm not sure if you've got any questions. I've done it so fast that it seems really short.
First, Iñaki, congratulations. Those of us who have been in the ERI project realize that your presentation fits perfectly with what we've been discussing for the last 3 years, and we hadn't really prepared it, so it just fits in perfectly. It's a perfect description. Since we've got enough time, I had about 3 questions, a little bit with the intention of leaving some loose ends that we could pick up then in the panel discussion, where we can talk a little bit about energy and circular economy and so on. The first thing was answering the question that you had asked in the IDEA project. In the data generation, we have disaggregated flows within the EU 27 plus EFTA, and when it was possible, what we tried to do was close with the data of region, country, or region world, where those figures existed. Sometimes you don't have the figures for example, in railway transportation, you don't have that. But for EU Regios, you do have it, because since we have worked on EU Regio 2013, that's the framework we have used, and we have adapted it to Figaro. Each flow region is afterwards is fed with by other region and country. We have Russia, we have China. So in the end, we add up to Figaro. I don't know if I answered your question with regard to that. Now the questions I had, this is really interesting on region to region level. Now we have the interregional tables. One of the things that we could produce, the scenarios that have had time, but there are questions that we still have to answer. For example, when we're talking about global value chains, and we started the project, everybody talks about global value chains, and then at the end of the project, everybody's talking about shortening global value chains, so we have to shift the project a little bit. So we talk about shortening, and I'm asking you as an expert in global chains. We saw 2 different discussions. One of them was the shortening in the sense that you're reducing intermediate steps traveling through the world until you generate the final flow, and then a dimension, if you wish, of a climatic context. I want to bring my suppliers closer to the final market. If there's a compatibility between reducing investments and reducing emissions, if this is compatible with not losing too much efficiency, that's the question. So since we have a more detailed origin and destination, we can have the kilometer in each component, so that you're you can also deduce the footprint of the global chain. Sorry. The other question or reflection. Now, for example, we're in this debate about energy, the energy shock, and the issue of inflation, and we can see, and we don't know that if well found or not, electricity as a final product is rising tremendously, but that's because the main input is going up, which is gas and oil. Now, to what extent, with the tools of those tables, can we also say in the field of inflation on how the shock that we're transmitting to your imports is then being transmitted to your final product, and how that has an influence on the added value? And that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. With respect to the database, you said that you used FIBA when we, Figaro. We didn't have Figaro, but now we would do it with Figaro. And in fact, in FC3, we have in contract with a new research center. We're taking extending the Figaro tables to more sectors. I think Figaro has 65 sectors. We're going to up to almost 200 sectors, and that could be interesting. I don't know in what measure that's going to fit in with the international trade data you have, but it could be interesting, particularly thinking in the idea of the circular economy panel discussion this afternoon. To talk about circular economy, you have to get into much more details than those 65 sectors. Well, here there were actually 35, and it's to reduce to when you want to identify circular economy strategies and symbiosis between among industries. Figaro is going to be there. It's going to be published in January, and it's the JRC. It's going to be open access, and the JRC is going to be managing it. So it's an input-output multi-region table at the country level. You're going to see employment, emissions, energy consumption, which for certain types of analysis can be really useful. With respect to the shortening of value chains, well, that trade-off between efficiency and fighting against climate change, and also reducing vulnerability to external events. We've seen after the pandemic, and we had no controls on microchips, where the production was concentrated in 2 countries in the world. So we're highly vulnerable to that, to disruptions disruptions in the supply chains. And maybe the optimal thing might be to delocate and concentrate, but in the medium term might not be the best strategy. So you always have that trade-off between vulnerability and efficiency, and then also you have climate change. Obviously, if we want to achieve the 2050 goals, what we have to do is reduce the emissions in the transport section. And the electrical sector is going to be relatively easy, and our Achilles heel is going to be the decarbonization of transport, and particularly transporting goods. It's not a question of shortening distances, but also transporting in a different way and doing another kind of logistics. And this is where we have to think about in the future. How can we how can we move goods in a different way? You were talking about the prices. Well, here we have two parts, particularly in the energy prices and electricity prices. I think that the models, the multi-regional models, are useful how changes in input prices can be transferred into the final outputs. But here, in the case you were mentioning before, you need a prior step and see how those prices, electricity prices, are fixed. Because if you go into an input-output model, it's going to go to the medium cost, not the marginal cost. So we have to calculate outside an input-output model, and then from there we'll see how the price moves through the supply chain to the end. And another aspect is the pass-through. You have to do a presumption of, you have to see to what extent what that rising prices of raw materials can be translated to along the value chain, or if they're going to reduce profits. If they reduce profits or salaries, there's no inflation. Other problems might happen, but what we're seeing is there's a lot of pass-through. And it's not the pass of electricity in Spain. So there's a lot more but I do think more static models of input-output are more useful when it comes to analyzing the changes in prices. I don't know if this is what you're referring to. I don't know if there are any other questions. Hello, good morning. Andrea Conte. Since you mentioned the RTC data, I wanted to speak about the regional and national aspects. Both informations that you're providing are correct. Even the databases were different. The basis that Carlos is talking about of integrated input-output at the NAT2 level for all European regions, which was developed in the context of the city, and it was developed in connection with the PBL, which was not linked to official Figaro statistics. The work you have done, Carlos, is very important when it comes to contacting the regional and associating regional and national. The work of José Manuel and the colleagues is starting from the nation, and what we're trying to do in the framework of a new organization, which we have had particularly in the data from 2017, and also at Figaro, which is the official statistics, is to integrate the regional and national dimensions. Then we have the possibility of giving the research community figures that are coherent. The experience that you have had in this project, in this fundamental aspect, for us too. So when we're working jointly, what we have developed is for this finality and sharing experience is the most reliable and precise.
Tal? Buenos días.
Morning. Thank you for your presentation. I'm not an expert in these areas, but I wanted to ask you, Navarre, you gave the example of Mercedes, of Vito. Navarra has the Volkswagen Polo. I have two reflections. If we can, to what extent mixing what you're talking about with the idea of close of capital, who ends up on the margins, who's maybe in the automotive sectors are different in Navarre than in the Basque Country. I think there's more own capital companies in the Basque Country. And the second thing, I think it's very interesting that in the aggregate export value, what are the niches that generate a not so obvious added value, those intangible services which might be hiding behind a large brand like vehicles. Maybe you have points where we could find regional strengths which are cross-cutting and can supply or can support other sectors, and a region that wants to improve its diversification against risk in different sectors. It could be a good basis for diversifying the economy in high added value. Although I think it's really suggestive and a lot of ideas are coming. But thank you. Bill, I think the first one is very important. We didn't do it because we don't have the information. We have the components of added value. We know what that part of added value is from workers and surplus, operating surplus, and so on. But we don't know where the operating surplus where it goes, and that's very interesting. I know that in other contexts, that type of information has been included in input-output models to see the responsibility of companies in global emissions. But similarly, we could incorporate that in information to distill a little bit the those results. It could be there or it could be somewhere else. And the other reflection, I think, is quite the way to improve that kind of analysis and to understand how it's being exported, but also in a fabric that might be integrated, but there are certain spillovers from exports, and both at the level of the region itself and but also surrounding regions. As you were asking that question, I was thinking in this project, many of us are wearing like two jackets because we have the project and also the academic, two hats, the academic hat and the project hat. So one of the, we estimated the impact and the next generation funds to when we saw the contribution that Gassenbacher and Barlow in the Journal of International Economics in 2022, they calculated, once they had calculated direct and indirect effects, they arrived at the income level, and with a country-country model, they used the matrices, the FDI matrices of direct investments and remittance, which is to, where do they participate in the global value chains. So the idea, our Greek colleagues have developed these totally innovative matrices of remittance at the international, and we have the next generation flows, applying these distribution hypotheses, and we calculated a second derivative of where the income arrived, and we got to conclusions with something that rather your hand trembles when you're going to send it to a journal, because Luxembourg, Switzerland, or London, they have this enormous percentage of income. We're making this tremendous effort to rescue these these regions that have been affected by COVID, and we have the place what we're all thinking about, the decision-making places for large multinational, and the second derivative. I don't know if it's academically, it's a bit of a hot potato politically, but what can we do? But it can be done with those major Cs. I think it's really, really interesting. And we're reflecting where I work and on the idea of the taxes that are being applied on electricity companies, the extraordinary profits of electricity companies, but where are those profits going? In the case of Spain, most of the utilities have foreign shareholders, typical big investment funds. There's a company in Spain that actually is owned by an Italian company. The fact that a company has the headquarters in Bilbao or Madrid, it doesn't mean that the owners are from that region. Another thing, you're touching part of the added value, but I might be touching another thing, which is the conversation with workers, and also the development funds and recovery funds. You're going to be missing a lot, but you're also going to be generated added value in terms of conversation with workers, which is going to stay. But this reflection of where all this money is going, I think, is really, really interesting.
Ninguna cuestión más, Iñaki.
Well, if there's no more Iñaki Arto, researcher at the Basque Center for Climate Change, let's have a hand. Now.